Fantasy football. T5 League Beauty Review.
All right, so we're back with matchup number 8, and in this matchup, we're going to be placing Malik Nabers from the New York Giants against Deebo Samuel, formerly from the San Francisco 49ers. At the time of our bracket, Samuel was listed as the number 1 wide receiver on the depth chart, even though there were some questions about whether or not that was his true position in San Francisco. Of course, none of that's relevant now. He's going to be playing for the Washington Commanders next season, and they have a clear wide receiver number 1 in Terry McLaurin. So we'll discuss some of the Washington Commanders offseason moves, how we believe that's going to impact Deebo for the upcoming fantasy year, and then, of course, we'll give you our breakdown and analysis of who would win in this one-on-one matchup. But with that, let's go ahead and jump over to New York, and we'll review some of the offseason moves they've made up to this point. So New York did agree to a 2-year, $12 million contract with James Hudson. He's an offensive tackle. This is going to bring some additional protection in depth to the offensive line. Now, this is going to be important because they also brought in Zach Pascal at wide receiver and Jameis Winston at quarterback. I don't think any of us are expecting Winston to be the starter for the Giants, but it's kind of fun as he's become a journeyman later in his career. He's shown that he is willing to throw the ball at any point in time to any location on the field, regardless of what's happening. So there's a ton of excitement there, especially when you pair him with Malik Nabers, who had an exceptional rookie season, by the way. I mean, probably the second best rookie season that we're going to see from the WR1s that we're covering here. The sky's the limit. You know, he could, if Winston was to potentially be day 1 starter, we could see Nabers receive over 170 targets. There also have been some rumors about Aaron Rodgers potentially joining the New York Giants. He's been rumored with talks with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Minnesota Vikings, even though I'm almost 100% certain this morning the Vikings have ruled out any possibility of bringing Rodgers in, and they're pretty solidified with J.J. McCarthy moving forward as their QB option. So we'll have to see what happens with the Steelers. And then with that being said, a lot of mock drafts currently have, in a surprise move, the Giants passing up on drafting Shedeur Sanders, assuming Cam Ward goes first round. And then it ends up leaving them with an edge rusher or taking a defensive position in the first round and then selecting one of the additional quarterbacks later. So Shedeur Sanders deciding not to participate in the draft or the Big 12 Pro Day is very interesting on how that's going to impact his draft stock. So now that we've covered a little bit of the offseason moves with the New York Giants, let's go ahead and move over to the Washington Commanders. So they did trade for Deebo Samuel. This was a 5th-round pick that they had given up. He's going to be joining Terry McLaurin in that wide receiver room, and he's expected to have a day 1 impact. Now, it's highly unlikely that Deebo will take away from McLaurin, but instead, he's most likely going to offer the Commanders with a little more versatility at the wide receiver position. We know that San Francisco loved to use him in motions, as well as finding ways to hand him off the ball and get him the ball with space to run. All right, he's a big physical guy. He's very hard to bring down. 3 years ago, I remember he was the hot topic in the offseason. Now, the Commanders had some key offseason moves, which included the acquisition of Laramie Tunsil. He's a left tackle. He was acquired via trade with the Houston Texans. Now, this is going to be very important because he should immediately come in and be a day 1 starter, as well as be able to rotate if anybody gets injured within the offensive line. They also brought in Michael Gallup at wide receiver, and they re-signed Noah Brown at wide receiver. Now, neither of them are expected to take away opportunities from McLaurin or from the new acquisition of Samuel. So I think that just having a little more of a veteran presence in the wide receiver core is what they're going for there. All right, now that we've discussed some of the offensive moves, let's do the comparison in the prior year fantasy points so we can kind of get an understanding of how we're going to be projecting each of these wide receivers to do in this upcoming year. We'll start with Deebo. So Deebo managed to have 8 bust weeks with only 2 boom weeks, and he finished 44th in the player ranking positions for wide receiver. Not very good. He did start the season strong with 2 18-plus point games, but then we see a fall off in the back half of the season. San Francisco kind of fell within that same tendency. His best game came in Week 16 against the Miami Dolphins. He had a stat line of 7 receptions for 96 yards. He had 1 touchdown on 9 targets. He also had 5 carries for 25 yards, but 0 touchdowns. He acquired 25.1 fantasy points in that game, and it was his season high. So we'll shift over to Malik Nabers. Now, Nabers, on the other hand, he only had 1 bust week, and then he ended up posting 5 boom weeks, and he finished with a player ranking of number 6. So that was pretty impressive. He's only behind 1 rookie so far. When we look at his actual stats, his best week came in Week 17 against the Indianapolis Colts. He had 7 receptions for 171 yards. He had 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. So a super high efficiency game for him. And against the Indianapolis Colts, he managed to amass 36.1 fantasy points in that game. So really big boom week for him. All right, now that we discussed their boom bust and player rankings, we're going to jump into the season totals for a comparison. So Deebo Samuel, on the season, he had 51 receptions for 670 yards. He had 3 touchdowns on 81 targets. He did have 42 carries, which is extremely high for a wide receiver, and he did amass 136 yards and 1 touchdown. He concluded his fantasy year with only 154 points, which not very good. I mean, we're talking like bench flex material. But when we shift over to Malik Nabers, Nabers had a franchise record for the New York Giants in receptions at 109 catches. He had 1,204 yards receiving with 7 touchdowns on 170 targets. I don't know if he's going to get 170 targets again this year, but fingers crossed if he's on your team that he sees very similar numbers there. He did manage 5 carries for 2 yards and 0 touchdowns. He ended his season with 274 fantasy points, which, as we mentioned, was good enough for number 6 in the player rankings. So this one, it seems pretty clear-cut. Deebo, we're not even sure if he should have been wide receiver 1 for San Francisco. He ended up getting traded to the Commanders, where he clearly will not be the number 1 over Terry McLaurin, but he will have a strong WR2 presence, and he might be a very good value pickup now that he's in a different environment. Maybe they can, he faced 2 injuries between his ribs and I believe a lower body injury throughout the course of last season. In Malik Nabers, the sky's the limit. The biggest question for Nabers is going to be, who's the starting quarterback for the New York Giants come week 1? And then once we get the starter, who can we keep healthy for the entirety of the year? He still managed to post incredible numbers in the quarterback carousel that took place last year for the Giants. So we're going to give our winner today is Malik Nabers. Malik advances to the second round. Deebo Samuel, he's headed to the bench. So that one wasn't as close to some of our prior matchups, but still, it kind of gives us an insight as to what's going on with each team's offseason, where these players are going to end up, what kind of stock we want to give them when it comes to the upcoming draft. Nabers being a number 6 ranking with a high ceiling, like we're only expecting him to improve. I definitely expect him to, go within one of those early rounds or at least be targeted there. All right, so our next matchup is actually going to be a very interesting one, in my opinion, because it's going to put Marvin Harrison Jr. for the Arizona Cardinals up against Drake London from the Atlanta Falcons. The Arizona Cardinals have Kyler Murray, and we'll be going into all of their offseason moves when we get into that breakdown. And Drake London's going to be playing with Michael Penix Jr., with the departure of Kirk Cousins looking very, very more realistic if it already hasn't happened yet. I haven't looked in the Kirk Cousins news, so no one's expecting him to be the starter, but in case Penix Jr. goes down, which I'm not, goodness gracious, it doesn't happen. That's always something that we need to consider. So that's going to be our next video. Check out our prior matchups. We've done a few good comparisons. We're kind of getting a better picture of what's going on with our second round. And we can already start to see, just based off of a certain review, who the top 10 targets, or at least 3 of the top 10 targets, are going to be for this upcoming year. 4, excuse me. Let's do 4. All right. With that, thank you. We'll see you on the next one. Leave a comment if you disagree, if you would pick a different wide receiver, or if there's a matchup that you're looking forward to in the coming second round.